What would you do if a 7-year-old girl walked into your office and asked you for a job, not because she wanted toys, but because her mother was dying? That is what happened to Edward Langston, a billionaire CEO, known for efficiency, logic, and control. He'd built an empire by calculating risk, but nothing prepared him for Lily Brennan Small, soaked from the rain, holding a R sum scribbled in pencil with one word underlined. Please, this isn't a story about wealth. It is about being seen, about a child who refused to cry and a man who hadn't cried in decades. Now imagine you were Edward. Would you dismiss or call security, or would you listen? And if you listened, truly listened, could you live the same life afterward? This story isn't about rescue. It's about reckoning, about the moment when power meets presence and a man has to choose what kind of legacy he'll leave behind. If you believe the smallest voices can carry the deepest truths, like share and subscribe to Shining Stories, because sometimes the words that change everything are only 5 syllables long. I need a job, please. Now, let us begin. Edward Langston, as mornings hadn't changed in over 15 years. At 6:00 sharp, the blinds of his corner penthouse office lifted automatically, unveiling the sleepy skyline of Portland. On clear days, Mount Hood loomed in the distance like a patient, snow-capped guardian. Inside, the space was polished and sterile, brushed steel fixtures, mahogany shelves lined with awards, and not a single personal photo on his desk. The room smelled faintly of leather and eucalyptus oil. Edward liked it that way. He arrived by 7:00 every morning. Black coffee, no cream, emails first. Then 3 rounds of performance briefs before most of the city's CEOs had finished their first yawn. Langston Health Systems wasn't just his company. It was the manifestation of his philosophy: order, efficiency, and control. He had built it from nothing, brick by cautious brick, after leaving a decade-long stint in the military medical corps, and he had never once deviated from the plan. Until the morning Lily Brennan walked through the revolving glass doors. It started with a buzz at the private elevator. Strange. No one ever interrupted Edward before 9:00, unless the building was on fire. Janine, his assistant, sounded different over the intercom, her voice unusually thin. "Mr. Langston, there is someone here to see you. She says it is urgent." Edward didn't look up. "Then tell them to schedule through. She has a child, sir. She has 7, maybe 8, alone." He paused. A child. There was a soft knock, and then before he could grant permission, the door creaked open. A small girl with golden hair stood just inside the threshold. She wore a pink windbreaker far too big for her, jeans with frayed hems, and muddy sneakers. In her hand, she held a folded sheet of notebook paper. She didn't speak right away. She simply stepped forward, calm and direct, walked up to his desk, and laid the paper flat. Then, without flinching, she said, "I need a job." The words echoed in the high-ceilinged office like a stone dropped into a silent lake. Edward stared at her, not because he was offended, but because the sheer certainty in her tone struck something in him he didn't recognize. He picked up the paper. It was handwritten in pencil, the letters uneven. Some letters reversed the work of a young but determined hand. At the top, she had drawn stars and a tiny, shaded-in heart. The R sum read, "I can clean. I don't cry in front of people. I can wait. I learn fast. I don't eat much. Please, just that. Just please. No tears, no drama, just a quiet offering." He looked back up. The girl was watching him with eyes the color of winter wheat, old eyes, tired in a way no child should be. He realized then that she hadn't blinked once since she walked in. "My name's Lily Brennan," she said, her voice steady, "and I am not here for toys. I am here to help my mom." Edward didn't respond. He couldn't. His throat tightened, a rare betrayal. He was used to lobbying boards, deconstructing medical ethics, outmaneuvering hostile investors. But nothing in his meticulously engineered life had prepared him for this. A child, asking for employment, wearing clothes 2 sizes too large, with a heart drawn next to the word please. "Where's your mother now?" he finally managed to ask. "At the Mercy Hill Clinic." She replied, "She is sick. She sleeps a lot." They said it cost too much. Something flickered behind Edward S.'s eyes, a memory, a pressure, a door he hadn't opened in years. His hand twitched toward the drawer where he kept a framed photo he hadn't looked at in a decade. Instead, he folded the piece of paper and set it gently on the desk. His voice was low now, gentler than he meant it to be. "Did she send you here?" Lily shook her head. "She doesn't know. She would be said no. But I looked you up. I read your name on a brochure at the hospital. You make things better. It should have been laughable at childish logic, but it wasn't. It was surgical. And somewhere deep in his carefully controlled world, something cracked. Edward Langston had faced down hostile acquisitions, patent lawsuits, and a wrongful death scandal in '08. But in that moment, what terrified him most was this question. What kind of man had he become? If this little girl thought a CEO could still fix people, he stood slowly, every movement deliberate, and stepped around the desk until he was standing at her level. He knelt, hands resting lightly on his knees. "What's your mother's name?" he asked softly. "Claire," Lily answered. "Claire Brennan." He nodded. A moment passed, then another. Edward made a decision not out of charity, not out of guilt, but something much quieter and heavier. He reached for his coat. "Come on, Lily," he said. "Let's just go see your mom." The drive to Mercy Hill Clinic felt longer than it was. Not because of traffic, it was early still. The roads damp and quiet, but because of the silence that filled the back seat of the company car. Edward Langston had never sat beside a child in his professional life. Yet here he was, seated next to a 7-year-old girl who stared out the window like she'd aged decades overnight. Lily clutched her backpack tightly, the same piece of paper folded neatly and tucked into the outer pocket. She didn't speak unless spoken to. When Edward asked if she was hungry, she said, "I had crackers yesterday." When he offered her his coffee shop muffin, she took it with both hands and whispered, "Thank you," like a practiced apology. The Mercy Hill Clinic came into view, a squat, aging building wedged between a liquor store and an empty lot. Paint peeled from the windowsills. The sign above the door blinked sporadically, one of the letters hanging crooked. Edward felt a twist in his chest. This wasn't tea where people came to heal. This was where they landed when healing cost too much. Lily led the way without hesitation, her sneakers squeaking on the linoleum floor. The receptionist glanced up and froze at the sight of Edward Crisp's suit, leather shoes, a presence too large for this place, but Lily stepped forward confidently. "Room 2C, she said, "Claire Brennan." The woman nodded, eyes wide, and pointed down a narrow hallway. Edward followed, not entirely sure what he was about to find. The room was small, too small. A single bed, one squeaky chair, and a heart monitor blinking a slow, steady rhythm. The walls were bare, except for a faded poster about flu prevention. The air smelled of antiseptic and forgotten time. Claire Brennan lay motionless, her skin pale, lips cracked, hair pulled back in a loose braid that had started to come undone. An IV line snaked from her arm, and her chest rose in shallow, uneven intervals. Lily moved to the bed without hesitation, her small fingers brushing her mother's hand. "Mom," she whispered, "I brought someone." Edward remained near the doorway, unsure if he was intruding. This woman, barely older than his own daughter would have been, was drowning in medical debt, alone, unconscious, and abandoned by a system that demanded payment before compassion. He looked away, guilt rising like bile. "I can leave," he offered softly. Lily shook her head. "You are here now." She said it with finality, like it mattered more than he understood. Edward stepped into the room and sat on the creaky plastic chair. For a long time, he said nothing, just watched the woman sleep, one hand curled around her daughter. "I read once," he murmured, "that sometimes people in comas can still hear voices. Maybe that's true. Maybe she'll hear you." Lily nodded, then looked at him. "I didn't come here to ask for a handout. I just wanted a chance," she said. She was strong before. She read me books every night. She made grilled cheese with the edges cut off. But now, she doesn't even open her eyes. There was a tremble in her voice then, the first crack in the armor she'd worn so tightly. Edward leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Why me, Lily? She shrugged. Because people said you fixed things, that you were smart and rich and don't let problems win. It should have been flattering. Instead, it felt like a wound. Because she didn't know the truth. He hadn't fixed things. Not really. Not when his daughter, Caroline, had been diagnosed too late. Not when the best doctors in his own network couldn't have stopped what biology had already claimed. Not when his marriage dissolved quietly under the weight of grief. He had thrown himself into work, into data, control, expansion, precision, everything but healing. And now, this little girl, this ghost of what he'd once had, was holding out a hand not for money, but for presence. I am not a miracle worker, he said quietly. Lily didn't blink. I don't need a miracle. I just need someone who doesn't leave. The sentence gutted him. He stared at the IV line, at the dark circles under Claire S. eyes, at the resume in Lily S. backpack. I'll have her transferred, he said suddenly, voice low. Private hospital, proper care, today. Lily S. eyes widened slightly, then narrowed. Why? Because you came to me, he said, and I don't know what that means yet, but it means something. He stood, already pulling out his phone, and Lily. She looked up. I'm not going to leave, not today, not tomorrow. Let us start there. The ambulance had left nearly an hour ago. Now. Edward sat in the waiting room of the private hospital he'd helped fund a decade earlier. St. Elora S. Medical Center was everything Mercy Hill wasn't. He polished floors, soft yellow walls, staff who spoke in calm tones and offered warm blankets without being asked. But Claire Brennan was still unconscious, and Lily hadn't spoken since they arrived. She sat in the corner of the room, feet dangling from the edge of the chair, clutching the same backpack like a lifeline. Her eyes didn't move. Not toward the nurses, not toward Edward, just forward still, silent, expectant. Edward had faced silence before, in war zones, in operating rooms, in the kitchen after his divorce papers were signed. But this silence, this was different. This was a child holding herself together so tightly. He feared what might happen if she let go. A nurse stepped into the room quietly. Mr. Langston? She asked. Claire is stable. No signs of neurological trauma, but she is deeply fatigued. We'll know more once the scans come back. He nodded, standing up. Can Lily see her? The nurse hesitated. She can, but what she hasn't been registered as family. Edward didn't flinch. She's her daughter. She goes in. The nurse studied his face and must be seen something firm enough to override policy. I'll walk her up. Edward turned to Lily. You ready? She didn't answer. She just stood up and followed. The room was brighter than the one at Mercy Hill. The curtains had been drawn open, revealing a courtyard garden below, where two birds hopped across the grass. Machines blinked gently. Claire lay still, but her color had returned slightly, her chest rising in steadier rhythm. Lily crossed the room and reached for her mother's hand. She didn't speak. Neither did Edward. He stood near the window, watching the girl's small frame lean in closer, her fingers pressing lightly into the back of Claire's hand as if willing her to wake. After a while, Lily turned to him. Can I stay here tonight? Edward hesitated. This wasn't part of any plan. He had board meetings, interviews, a pending acquisition. But somehow, none of it seemed relevant. I'll make it happen, he said. She nodded once. Thank you. The silence returned, but this time, it didn't feel as heavy. It felt shared. That evening, Edward found himself back in his office, but it no longer felt familiar. The desk felt too large, the espresso too bitter, the room too quiet in all the wrong ways. He pulled open the bottom drawer, slowly. Inside was a photo, slightly faded, edges curled. Caroline Langston, 7 years old, missing her 2 front teeth, laughing, hair tangled in the wind, holding a toy stethoscope to his chest. His throat closed. He hadn't looked at this photo in over 10 years. And yet, there she was, same age as Lily, same fire, Same fierce need to fix what couldn't be fixed. He remembered the hospital hallway, the screaming, the stillness, the unbearable stillness. He had walked away from that moment and never walked back, until now. At 10:47 p.m., Edward returned to the hospital. Lily had fallen asleep on the small couch beside the bed, curled up like a kitten, her backpack still under her head. Claire had not woken, but she was breathing evenly. Her face looked softer in sleep. Edward sat in the chair beside her and exhaled slowly. "I don't know if you can hear me," he said, "but your daughter, she's something else." He chuckled quietly, more to himself than anyone else. "She walked into my office this morning like she owned the world, and maybe she does. She asked me for a job, not pity, not help. A job." He paused. "I used to think the only way to change the world was through control, strategy, numbers. Maybe that was wrong. Maybe it takes showing up. Maybe it takes staying." He reached into his coat and pulled out Lily S.R. sum. He placed it gently on the bedside table. "You raised her right," he said. A minute passed, then 2. Claire didn't stir. But something shifted in the room, not physically, emotionally, like the air had softened. And for the first time in years, Edward Langston didn't want to leave. By the time dawn lit the windows of St. Elora Medical Center, Edward Langston was still awake. He hadn't gone home. Instead, he had stayed in the same chair beside Claire Brennan's bed, watching the rhythm of her breathing, the blinking monitors, and the way Lily stirred in her sleep every time her mother's vitals shifted. It was the quietest night he'd experienced in years, and the heaviest. Around 6:0 p.m., Lily opened her eyes. She looked around, found Edward still there, and blinked slowly. "You didn't leave." He shook his head. "Didn't it feel right?" She sat up, hair tangled from sleep. People usually do. The sentence lingered in the space between them like morning mist. Not accusatory, just factual. Learned. Survived. Edward stood and stretched his back. "I had my assistant bring breakfast." She eyed the bag. "Is there cocoa?" He smiled. 2 cups. Lily took hers gently, like it might disappear. Later that morning, Edward met with the head physician and a social worker. They spoke in clipped, professional tones about Claire's condition. Stage 3 lymphoma, aggressive, treatable, but only with the right protocol and quickly. Insurance coverage was a mess. Claire had been working part-time at the local library until her health declined. No benefits, no savings. The clinic had been buying time, but that time was almost gone. "I'll cover everything," Edward said. The room fell quiet. The physician raised a brow. "Mr. Langston, I am not donating." Edward cut in. "I am assuming responsibility. Her care, her recovery, her child's stability." The social worker, Jenna Miles, tilted her head. "Are you family?" "No," Edward replied, "not by blood." He didn't explain further, because he didn't know how. Back at the room, Claire still hadn't awoken, but her fingers moved occasionally, now tiny signals that something was happening beneath the surface. Lily was drawing on a clipboard, silent. She had sketched 3 figures, a woman with long hair, a little girl, and a tall man in a suit, holding both their hands. Edward looked at the drawing. "Is that me?" he asked gently. She didn't look up. "You were in it because you stayed." He sat beside her. "Lily," he said slowly, "you know this isn't normal, right? That I don't usually do this. That I am not a dad." He froze. She finally turned her head. "I know, but you were kind, even when you were serious." He couldn't help the quiet laugh that escaped. "Serious? Huh?" She nodded. "You don't smile much, but your voice gets softer when you care about something." Edward stared at the drawing again. "I think I forgot how to smile," he admitted. "Somewhere along the way. Maybe we can help you find it," she offered. And just like that, she went back to coloring in the grass. That afternoon, he returned to his office for the first time in 2 days. His team was waiting, confused, concerned, and, in some cases, irritated. The company was preparing for its IPO. There were interviews lined up, shareholder calls, market expectations. "You missed 3 strategy meetings," said Paul Keller, the CFO. "Is everything all right?" Edward didn't answer at first. He walked to the window, looked down at the city below. "How much do you think this company is worth?" he asked quietly. Paul blinked. "Market value." "No, real value. If it were your daughter in that bed, if you needed to pick between another 0 on our earnings report or someone saying, 'I stayed,' which would you pick?" Silence. Long and awkward. "I'm asking because I'm not sure anymore." Edward added. There was a long pause. "You're not seriously considering diverting company resources." "I am not diverting anything. I am doing this as me, as Edward Langston, not the brand, but perception. Let them perceive. Let them talk." He turned back toward his team. "This isn't a charity. It is a choice." That evening, Lily met him at the hospital entrance, holding 2 paper cups of cocoa. "I saved you one this time," she said. He took it, warmed by the gesture more than the drink. Inside, Claire remained unconscious, but her color had improved. Nurses noted stronger vitals. There was still a long way to go, but something about the room had changed. Maybe it was the light, maybe it was the presence, maybe it was love. Edward sat down, Lily beside him, and for the first time in years, he let himself be still. No meetings, no metrics, just one woman, one child, and a promise he wasn't going to break. 2 days after Claire Brennan's transfer, the phone calls started. At first, it was internal. Board members wanted updates, investors wanted clarity. His VP of Public Relations, Melissa Grant, left him 3 increasingly concerned voicemails in under an hour. But then, the media caught wind of it. Someone likely from within the hospital staff had leaked that Edward Langston, CEO of Langston Health Systems, had paid out of pocket to move an unconscious woman and her child into a private wing, with full access to executive-tier medical services. They didn't have last names. They didn't have context, but they had a headline: "Billionaire CEO prioritizes strangers over shareholders." Edward read the headline in silence, seated in his car outside St. Elora's Medical Center, with the engine still running. It didn't make him angry. It made him tired. Tired of the machine that devoured meaning and spit out scandal. Tired of the expectation that success meant detachment. Tired of pretending that numbers were more important than people. He didn't go upstairs right away. He just sat there until Lily knocked on the window. He rolled it down. "You're late," she said, not unkindly. "I had to talk to some grown-ups who forgot how to be human." She tilted her head. "Did you remind them I tried?" he said. "They don't always listen." "Then maybe you should talk like a kid." That made him laugh, genuinely this time. She climbed into the front seat beside him without asking. "Want to sit here with me for a minute before we go back in?" "Sure." And they sat there, in the quiet. The man who had once built an empire by always pushing forward, and the girl who was teaching him how to stop, inside the hospital room. Claire was slowly improving. Her eyes had opened once briefly, and she'd murmured something Edward couldn't catch. Her hand had twitched in Lilia's. The doctors said it was progress, but Edward felt the tension rising around them. That morning, Paul Keller had confronted him again. This time, with the board's backing. "You are putting the IPO at risk." "Edward," Paul said sharply, "we've already had 2 institutional investors pull out due to instability in executive priorities. Your name is all over Twitter. Journalists are spinning this like you're playing hero." "I didn't ask for press," Edward replied calmly. "I asked for time, for a child, for a woman who has been abandoned by a system we profit from. You want to talk about the system? You built the system. We all did. You just decided to rewrite the rules overnight, and now you expect us to follow. I am not asking you to follow me." "Then what are you doing?" Edward looked at him squarely. "I am following her." Paul blinked. Who he didn't answer, but the image in his mind was clear. A little girl with a backpack, AR sum written in pencil, a voice that didn't tremble when it said, "I need a job." Back at the hospital, Lily was folding paper cranes at the foot of her mother's bed. She had found a stack of old prescription instructions and was turning them into something soft, something hopeful. Edward sat down beside her. "I talked to some people today," he said. "Important ones. People who think what we are doing here is a mistake." She looked up. Helping Mom, helping anyone. Without a plan. Without a spreadsheet. She thought for a moment. "Plans are just guesses," she said. "But staying with someone when they were scared, that is real." Her words didn't come with the polish of adulthood, but they carried a weight he hadn't felt from any executive summary. And suddenly, he felt it again, that sharp pull in his chest. Not regret, not fear, just the terrifying realization that maybe, just maybe, he had missed the point for most of his life. That evening, Edward held a virtual town hall for the company. The screen flickered to life. Faces appearing in boxes across the country: developers, department heads, doctors, administrators. Over 600 employees had logged in. Some were curious, some angry, some just confused. Edward looked straight into the camera. "I know you've heard the stories," he began. "Some of them are true, some of them aren't. But here's what matters." He took a breath. "I met a girl last week. She walked into my office with nothing but a backpack and a handwritten R-sum. She wasn't asking for pity. She was offering help, because her mother was dying, and no one else would listen." The chat exploded. Comments pinged in the corner of the screen, but Edward didn't look. He continued. "I've built this company to be efficient, to be profitable. But somewhere along the way, I forgot that it was supposed to be about people. And if that means our IPO waits another month or year, then so be it." He paused. "I am not stepping down. I am not apologizing. I am staying because she asked me to." Then he turned off the feed. And for the first time in years, he felt light. That night, Lily handed him another drawing. This one was simpler, just two figures sitting on a bench. One small, one tall, no faces. Just peace. "Is that us?" he asked. She nodded. "It is, when we were not trying to fix everything." Edward folded the drawing and placed it in his coat pocket. Then he looked at Claire, breathing a little deeper, color rising in her cheeks. And he whispered, "We are not fixing. We restaying." The sixth morning came with rain. Not a storm, just that soft, constant drizzle that painted the hospital windows in rippling streaks. Inside, Claire Brennan's room. The lights were low, the machines steady. Lily was curled beside her mother again, a book open but unread in her lap. Edward Langston stood in the hallway, coffee cooling in his hands, watching. He had memorized the sound of that room, the rhythmic pulse of the monitors, the tiny hum of the IV drip, the occasional shift of Lily's breathing when she stirred in her sleep. These sounds had replaced his calendar alarms, his email chimes, his meetings, and somehow it felt right. But this morning, something changed. It began with a twitch, a flicker of movement from Claire's eyelid, then another. Her fingers clenched and released, her lips parted, soundless at first, then forming the shape of something unspoken. Edward stepped in. "Lily," he said softly, "wake up." She stirred, blinking. "What is it?" He pointed. Claire's eyes opened, wide, glazed, searching. Lily was on her feet in a heartbeat. "Mom," she whispered, tears instantly welling up. "It is me. I'm here." Claire blinked again. Her lips moved, dry and cracked, and then the sound emerged, faint and hoarse. Lily. It wasn't loud. It wasn't strong, but it was everything. Lily clutched her mother's hand and sobbed quietly, her body trembling with relief. Edward stepped back, letting them have the moment. He had witnessed miracles before, some real, some scientific, but none had broken him like this. He turned toward the hallway, gripped the edge of the doorway to steady himself, and felt something break open inside him. A memory flooded in, uninvited. Caroline, his daughter. The last time he held her hand in a hospital bed, how tightly she had gripped it, even while slipping away, how he had promised he wouldn't let her go, and then he had, not physically, but emotionally. He had buried her behind spreadsheets in sterile order. Until now. Doctors and nurses flooded in moments later. Words like responsive, stable, and neurologically intact floated around the room. Lily watched, eyes wide, clutching the cocoa cup Edward had brought her earlier. Claire, still groggy, tried to focus. The doctor smiled. "You're doing well. Claire, you've been asleep for a few days, but you're back with us now." She murmured something unintelligible. Then her eyes found Edward. Confusion, then clarity. "You him," she rasped. Edward stepped closer, unsure whether to nod or explain. Claire's brow furrowed. "The one from the office." Lily beamed. "He helped us. Mom." He stayed. Claire's lips trembled. She looked down at her daughter, then up at Edward again. Why wasn't he accusatory? Just honest. Edward didn't answer right away. He sat beside the bed. "Because she reminded me of someone I lost," he said. "And because, when she looked at me, she didn't see a CEO. She saw someone who could still care." Tears welled in Claire's eyes. She turned toward Lily. "You did this." Lily nodded, quietly. "I had to." Edward stood, sensing the emotion in the room swell to a point that needed space. "I'll be outside," he said softly. In the hallway, Jenna Miles, the hospital social worker, was waiting. "You look like you've aged 10 years, she said with a small smile. Edward nodded. "Feels like 20. She's awake. That's a victory, but there's still a long road." "I know." Jenna hesitated, then asked, "And you were still all in?" Edward looked through the window at Lily S., hand curled in her mother's. "Yes, all in." That evening, Lily and Edward sat in the hospital's rooftop garden. The rain had stopped. The city lights below flickered like 1,000 stories unfolding at once. Lily was quiet. Edward handed her a granola bar. "You haven't eaten much." She took it. "Neither have you." He smiled. "Touch." She looked up. "What happened to your daughter?" The question landed softly, but pierced deeply. Edward leaned back, staring at the sky. "Caroline. She was 7. Leukemia. We fought for a long time. We lost." Lily was quiet for a while. "Is that why you stayed with us?" "In part," he said, "but also because no one should have to grow up alone in a hospital room." She didn't respond, just leaned gently against his arm. After a while, she whispered, "She said my name today. That means she remembers me." Edward looked down at her. She never forgot, and neither had he. It didn't take long for the board to move. 3 days after Claire Brennan woke up, Langston Health Systems Executive Committee scheduled an emergency session. The language in the invite was clinical reevaluation of fiduciary priorities amid reputational volatility. But Edward Langston knew what it really meant. They wanted him gone. The boardroom was colder than he remembered. Maybe it was the air conditioning, or maybe it was just the eyes watching him like he was already a stranger. Paul Keller sat at the head of the table. Melissa Grant, the PR chief, flanked his right. A few younger board members avoided direct eye contact. A few older ones looked almost sad, like they didn't want to do this, but saw no other way. Edward stood at the end of the table. No slides, no charts, just him. Paul spoke first. "Edward, we appreciate your years of leadership. You've built something incredible here, but your recent actions, you mean helping someone." Paul hesitated. "We mean diverting focus, creating liability, and undermining trust." "Whose trust?" Edward asked. "The market's. Our partners, the very foundation this company relies on." Edward stepped closer. "I started this company to help people. You all came later. You brought the capital, the reach, the scale, and I am grateful. But Don to stand there and tell me that compassion is a threat to our mission." Melissa cleared her throat. "Edward, this isn't personal. It's procedural. You've become unpredictable, emotional. I am emotional," he said, "because for the first time in years, I remembered what it means to care about someone without a contract in between." A murmur went through the room. He took a breath. "I'm not stepping down," he said, "but if the board wants to remove me, you'll have to vote." and then look my team in the eye and explain why staying with a child in a hospital room was more damaging than any scandal we've faced before. Silence. Then Paul, voice like ice, we recalling for the vote. He didn't wait for the results. Edward walked out of the room, down the elevator, through the lobby, past security, past the wall of awards, past the version of himself that had been worshipped by headlines. Outside, the wind had picked up. He didn't check his phone. He didn't call his attorney. He just got into his car and drove toward the only place that made sense anymore, St. Elora S. Lily was in the lounge, coloring again. Claire was sitting up now, weak but alert, watching her daughter with a soft smile that hadn't graced her face in months. When Lily saw him, she lit up. "You re back?" He nodded. "I thought maybe you had to go do big business things." He knelt beside her. "I did, but they weren't of the right kind of big." Claire looked at him carefully. "Are you all right?" He sat down across from her. "I might not be CEO by tomorrow morning," he said. "They think I've gone off script." Claire didn't say anything right away. Then she said, "Maybe the script needed changing." He looked at her pale, exhausted, but defiant. "And you think helping you is worth all this?" he asked gently. She shook her head. "No, I think Lily is..." He turned toward the girl, now tracing clouds with a blue crayon. "She came to you when no one else did," Claire said. "You gave her hope, not just treatment, presence. Most people give donations. You gave time." Edward S.'s voice softened. "I didn't know what I was doing." "You didn't have to." Claire reached out, her hand finding his. "You just had to stay." That night, Edward didn't go home. He sat by Claire's bed after Lily had fallen asleep, watching the monitors blink their steady rhythm. Outside, the city roared in digital distraction. But inside that small hospital room, 3 people each broken in their own way had created something whole, not out of power, not out of obligation, but out of the single human choice to show up. 3 weeks had passed since the board vote. The paper said he had stepped down, but everyone inside the company knew the truth. Edward Langston had been pushed. There was no scandal, no lawsuit, just a quiet resignation letter, delivered without fanfare, with a single sentence that read, "Legacy isn't measured by shares held, but by lives touched." And just like that, he was gone from the world he had built, but he was very much alive in a world he had only just discovered. The apartment was modest. 2 bedrooms, a small balcony, 2nd floor of a red brick building near the city's botanical gardens. It had wide windows and soft light in the mornings. Lily had picked it because it had a yellow door, like sunshine. Edward had furnished it himself, not with luxury, with intention. A bookshelf for Claire S. recovery journals, a tiny art table for Lily S. drawings, a coffee maker that brewed cocoa just right. This place wasn't a temporary. It was real. Claire was stronger now, still thin, still resting more than she liked. But she could walk from the bedroom to the balcony and back without help. Some mornings, Edward would find her standing barefoot near the sliding door, looking out at the sky. "You okay?" he would ask. "Still here," she'd reply, still grateful. Sometimes they talked about her treatment, sometimes about books. But mostly, they talked about Lily, how brave she'd been, how she still hummed when she concentrated, how she always made sure there were 3 mugs on the table, not 2, just in case someone new comes. She said once, "We should always have room for one more." Lily was thriving. She had been enrolled in a nearby school. Edward walked her there every morning, backpack bouncing, hair in loose braids. She waved at squirrels, collected pebbles, and always pointed out clouds that looked like something. One afternoon, she handed him a new drawing, 3 figures standing in front of a yellow door. "This is home," she said. "It doesn't look like much, but it feels big inside." Edward folded the picture and placed it in his coat pocket next to the first R sum she'd ever given him. One Sunday, they visited the cemetery where Caroline Langston was buried. Edward hadn't been there in years. The grass was overgrown, the name etched faintly in stone. Lily carried a single daisy. Claire stood beside Edward, quiet, not pressing. "I used to think coming here would undo me," he said, "that if I looked at this place long enough, I'd fall into it. But you didn't." Claire said. No. He nodded. I didn't. He knelt, placed a hand on the cold stone. She would be liked you, he whispered. Both of you. Then Lily stepped forward, laid the daisy down, and said simply, she helped you find us. That evening, they sat on the balcony, cocoa in hand, watching the sun dip behind the city. Claire leaned back in her chair, head resting against the frame. Lily sat cross-legged, a storybook open in her lap. Edward looked at them not as a benefactor, not as a businessman, but as someone who had found something worth staying for. You okay, Claire asked him this time. He nodded. Yeah, I think I finally am. She studied him. You still miss it. The company. Everything that came with it. He thought about it. I miss believing it meant something, he said, but I don't miss who I became trying to hold on to it. She smiled. What do you think this is? Then she asked, gesturing to the apartment, the cocoa, the girl quietly mouthing words from a page. He looked around. This, he said softly, is the legacy that matters. It was a Wednesday afternoon when the letter arrived. Cream-colored envelope, hand-addressed, simple, no logo. Lily was the one who brought it in. She held it carefully between her fingers, like it might vanish if touched too roughly. It is us from the hospital, she said. They said you'd want to read it yourself. Edward Langston opened it slowly, hands steady. It was from Dr. Nguyen, Claire S. lead oncologist. The letter outlined what they had hoped for, and feared to hope too loudly. Claire S. cancer had officially entered remission. There would still be months of medication, checkups, monitoring, but the tumor was gone. For the first time in years, Claire Brennan was free. They didn't celebrate with champagne. Instead, they went to the park. Lily brought a kite red and shaped like a bird. Claire wore a scarf even though the day was warm. Edward packed sandwiches, peanut butter, no crust. They laughed, ran barefoot. Let the wind write new stories in the sky. I used to think I'd never see her run again, Claire said, watching Lily chase the tail of the kite. Edward didn't answer. He was watching her too, seeing not just the child, but the strength she had carried for both of them. That night, as they tucked Lily into bed, she looked up at Edward. Do you remember the first thing I ever said to you? She asked. He smiled. I do. You didn't laugh. She said, I wanted to. He admitted, not because it was silly, but because it was brave. I meant it, Lily whispered. I know. She reached under her pillow and pulled out the piece of paper, the R-sum, folded, worn, edges soft from being held too many times. I kept it, she said. In case you forgot. Edward took the paper, unfolded it, read the same words again. I can clean. I don't cry in front of people. I can help. I can learn. Please. A single heart drawn in the corner. He looked at Lily. You never needed a job, he said. You needed someone to stay. She nodded. And you did. Later that night, Edward sat alone on the balcony, cocoa in hand, moonlight washing the city in silver. He didn't miss his office. He didn't miss the meetings, or the power, or the control. He missed Caroline. He always would. But he had something now that he never expected a reason to remember her without drowning. He pulled Lily S.R. sum from his coat pocket and folded it carefully the way you might fold a letter you could never part with. Then, quietly to himself, he whispered the sentence that had changed his life. I need a job. It hadn't been a plea. It had been a bridge, from one life to another, from success to significance, from surviving to truly living. Sometimes, it only takes 5 words to change a life, not because they were loud, but because they were true. I need a job, please. Lily Brennan didn't ask for pity. She didn't cry for attention. She simply showed up like so many voices in our world that go unheard, unseen, forgotten. And Edward Langston. He didn't just save her. She saved him by reminding him, and all of us, that the true measure of a person isn't power or position but presence. This story isn't just about one little girl and one man who chose to stay. It's about every child who grows up too fast, every mother fighting in silence, Every human being quietly passed over because of where they came from or what they lack. Discrimination doesn't always scream. Sometimes, it whispers in policies, in indifference, in the way we look away from those who ask for help with dignity. So, let this story sit with you. And when you see someone like Lily, may you not look through them. May you see. If this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us keep telling stories that matter. And trust us, the next one may stay in your heart even longer than this. Until then, stay kind, stay human, and always stay present.